Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa, super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate taste of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am now off for 2.5 weeks and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I also have 2.5 weeks off, which is the best benefit of my entire job. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of this fucking movie, bro! This movie was great. And I love movies that depict social movement organizing in real concrete terms. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
Well, follow up from our last episode, because I've now seen May December, which is my favorite movie of the year so far. I fucking loved every second of it. It was awesome. I love a quiet but unhinged Julianne Moore performance, and this is like the quietest, most unhinged Julianne Moore performance, where like, I don't know, she never has like a big moment or any, like, you know, like a big, like, there's never like a big like Oscar moment. Well, there's a couple like still quiet, but she
in a movie that has performances that do like, you know, like Natalie Portman has like several moments where she's like delivering a monologue, right? Or like Charles Melton is like having a real standout moment. You're right. She doesn't necessarily have that singular.
Yeah, I think Julianne Moore's like what's so interesting is that character specifically avoiding moments like that. Like, I don't want to have a big breakthrough. I don't want to think about this. I don't want to have to address it.
Right, that's the only way her lie can
like, justify
continue.
Itself in her head. Yeah. God damn, and you were right about Charles Melton. That guy, I'd never seen him in anything, but he's so good.
Also, I realized on that episode, I referred to him as Euphoria. He's not. He's Riverdale.
I think you corrected in the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you corrected it in the
I
moment.
just remember I was listening back and I was like, that was not right.
Yeah, because that did not stick with me. I remember you saying he was
I don't
Riverdale.
watch either of them, but I was, a friend pointed it out to me, so I figured I'd correct it.
But yeah, the scene where he's like smoking weed with his like 18-year-old son on the roof and has that like finally has like a moment of like, what the fuck?
It is really masterful to be able to straddle essentially like multiple lines of kind of maturity simultaneously, because he's kind of coming into awareness about the fact that he is dislodged from like his linear trajectory of aging, while also still displaying those like tendencies and like repressions or the outcome of repression. There's
a lot of like just like he's doing a lot of stuff that I feel is unspoken, but like so quiet. Like, I think so much of the movie, there's pretext building up to like, because the movie only takes place over a couple weeks, but there's so much building up that, you know, this has been something going on for obviously years and years. And the thing that I felt like was very quiet and not really ever spoken, but you can tell it seemed like in that character, a switch flipped when his children surpassed the age when he first was starting to be abused. And that's when like you can see like maybe at first he was like chill with it, and then over time, and when he sees his own kids like starting to grow up, like he really brings like gravity to the role that I don't know, he's fucking great in it. I mean, they're both great, everyone's great in it, but like he is really, really good. And
really
like,
solid performances,
a young dude
around.
Like holding his own with legendary,
which is the wildest wildest part of it. And I hope that he does get a nom.
I feel like that is one that would get overlooked by like a young guy. Like
so Little Gold Men is an award season podcast I like a lot, that's run by Vanity Fair, and I can't remember his last episode or the one before, they recently did a breakdown of kind of like what's the status of the various Critics' Choice Awards and all of these things, and they point out it's just very competitive acting categories in general this year, but the best supporting actor has like De Niro in it, right? Like possibly there's been the Academy has been doing a lot of double nominating in supporting actor and actress categories. So like might get a DiCaprio in there. Like he's just going up against some really heavy hitters. But I hope that he gets that nom
that would be awesome.
At least because it is like a master class in holding your own amongst heavyweights.
Yeah.
You know?
I also want to talk about, because I saw this going around on like Twitter and social media, the idea that Natalie Portman is a bad actress.
That's
who's
bullshit.
good at playing
bad
marks. Actresses.
They're marks. They're getting conned. Like that.
Right. I think. Well, the ones that like I feel like get brought up the most was obviously it got brought up again because of May December, but then Black Swan and Jackie, and I feel like all
Delusion.
of those are like a woman who's playing. I mean, she's playing a woman with like under different types of like severe scrutiny or like eyeballs or whatever, and she is bringing like an element to it that I don't get it.
The idea that her performance in Jackie is bad is
crazy,
facile. Like I can't even engage that because it's also a very like subtle performance. She's not being hammy, so I can't even grasp like what they're latching onto in that performance. I mean, Black Swan.
Have you seen similar like conversations online?
Have,
and
I I've definitely seen it. I just think it's either people being contrarians or they're marks. Like she is good. She is in May December intentionally playing a bad actress. It's the dramatic irony of the movie is that she is taking herself she's so self-serious about her performance, and then ultimately she is just creating another Lifetime movie that's exploiting the melodrama of these people's lives. Like that's the whole fucking point. I don't
like there is I think those people are just not understanding what like melodrama is, or like I also think there's an element of child actor becoming a grown actor, which I feel like first is worse for women that were children actors and became
Is there some like residual thing that people are sticking on to?
And I think, listen, don't cancel me, she's very pretty, and I think there is something about child actors who become pretty that people like
are not able
like,
to
you,
grant
boy.
right
like,
not able to grant
gender,
the ability
like,
to possess skill.
Because I know this conversation is about to happen with the Iron Claw and Zac Efron, because I haven't seen it. Have you? It
does not drop until the 22nd.
Okay, but like he's already getting a lot of buzz for like how good his performance is, and I know we're gonna go through this too of him being like a shitty pretty boy actor. And I think there is something about child stars who grow up, like if they're not like drop dead gorgeous, I feel like people give them more of like artistic license, whereas if they're like known to be a very pretty person, they get
kind
a
of
little bit more shit for
locked in a box. You can only be good at so many things.
Yeah.
I can't wait for Iron Claw. Mike and I are driving down south to see our respective families tomorrow, and I was like, I will go down a day earlier than we initially planned, but I'm seeing the Iron Claw the second that I can do so. That's the agreement is that we are going, like, we will go a day earlier. But
my wife and I are over the break. We're catching up on. We haven't been in the theater in so long that like we.
And this is like that prime time.
There's so much good shit
it's
out.
Killing me that, and it ends up working out because a friend wants to see it for her birthday. So when we return, we will see it as a little group. That Poor Things drops tomorrow while we're traveling. It's like my most anticipated movie. I know I've talked about before, but I love Yorgos Lanthimos. So I'll be hitting
Twitter
that.
call him Borgos Lanthimos.
I mean, you can't save people from themselves. You know, like you can't save people with bad taste from themselves, unfortunately.
Another cool movie that I saw is a movie called Satan Wants You, which is a documentary that just came out. Do you know who Michelle Smith and Larry Pazder are?
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I saw this in the notes, one, I need to know where you watched this because I might go watch this after I go to the gym.
I rented it for like $2.99 on Amazon.
Okay.
But it is awesome. It is like, okay.
And it's a new release?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
It's a documentary about this woman, Michelle Smith, and her psychiatrist turned lover, Larry Pazder, who...
There's always some wrapped up, like Freud is chomping at the bit to dig into all of this bullshit.
Ooh, man, and he's a real weirdo. But the thesis of the movie is essentially if you want to actually one of the talking heads in the documentary says like this book is patient zero of the Satanic Panic. Essentially, it is a book that they have a very obviously a weird relationship. This doctor and this woman, and after years, he's like insanely Catholic and sees the devil in everything, and he convinced her. Listen, I'm all for like people's lived experiences. They've never admitted that they made all this up, but enough people who were close to them were like, this is all bullshit, that I'm going to go ahead and say that this shit is all made up.
Well, and also if we can plug it into like you're saying, the broader like societal dynamic of satanic panic, and also of like overly reliance on psychology and psychologizing
of that,
as a frame or like as a discipline, such that any like meaningful critique gets abandoned, and thus opens it to exploitation.
Right. So this guy through therapy uncovered some repressed memories of Michelle that for a 14-month period when she was 5 to 6 years old, her mother sold her to a satanic cult who did ritual abuse on her and like made her like eat babies and shit. And then this book comes out, and it's like, by the way, if anybody can get their hands on a copy of this motherfucker.
I read this book.
Did you?
As probably like a 13 or 14-year-old.
Hell yes. And the cover art for it is like awesome. It's like dope 70s Stephen King cover art. Is really cool. But it's all like bullshit about these repressed memories, and is essentially, when the book came out, they started going on like, you know, the daytime talk shows, Sally, Jesse, Raphael, and all that. And that is kind of the catalyst of these daytime talk shows talking about like satanic panic, and it definitely like pushed the satanic panic of the 80s. It was fucking crazy. It's wild, and just to see like how it's still like so much of the shit she's talking about is what drives like Pizzagate and QAnon.
Right, it's just back.
It's just like recycling all
first
that.
Is tragedy, then is farce.
Yeah, they touch on that briefly in the movie as well. But goddamn, I love that kind of shit, and this movie is crazy, is wild.
Yeah, that's dope. I'm glad you bring it up. I definitely wanna check that out.
And then the last thing I want to talk about is not really, I don't know if it's pop culture at all. But I went to the fucking craziest garage sale, and I got some good stuff. But
Sick.
One thing that I want to talk about. So my mom does like a side gig where she like helps old people like do estate sales.
Okay.
For stuff like my mom just loves garage sales. I love garage sales too. But when my mom retired, she started doing this. So basically, I get to pick through all the shit before anybody else and get
amazing.
So this was a like. My mom's like, oh, you got to see this house. This house is crazy. So I show up, and it is a like 6,500 square foot house on 11 acres. It is like a mansion, and it's got the fucking craziest fireplace I've ever seen in my life that like curves around. It looks like Tom Bombadil had like an LSD trip and like designed a fireplace. Like there's like a slot for a dragon dagger to just hang, and it's ugly as shit, but like in a way that I was like, hey, I could rock with this if I lived here. Like it's ugly as fuck, but like I was kind of like, all right.
It sounds like a place where ritualized abuse
right
theoretically happened.
But the dude that lived there who passed away was apparently cool as shit. Like he had a room that was bigger than any of the rooms in my house that was just the library. It was just floor to ceiling bookshelves. And he had like hella good taste, and also respect, because he had them in sections. So there was like fiction, there was nonfiction, then it's more specific, sci-fi, travel. Yeah. But I picked up all 7 or 8 of Gore Vidal's narratives of empire that he had, which are now on my shelf right there.
Sick.
And yeah, which if you're unfamiliar with his narratives of empire, which I've not read any of them, but they're essentially historical fiction / nonfiction where he retells, he inserts fictional characters into real moments in U.S. history to kind of retell the whole empire angle of America in general. Like literally the first one is I think the first one is Burr, where like Aaron Burr is a main character, and then the last one is Golden Age or Hollywood, which is like going up to the 1960s. But yeah, I'm excited as fuck to dig into those and read them. And I bought so much shit at this guy's house, mostly books, because this guy had great taste.
I was excited when you said you were going to bring up Gore Vidal, because there's a like blurb going around on Twitter this week of I don't know what book it's from, but of Gore Vidal and Tennessee Williams talking about Tennessee Williams hitting on JFK, or like talking to Gore Vidal about like how hot JFK is, and that Gore Vidal told him like, you can't cruise our next president, basically. So I just wanted to bring that up. I am a much bigger fan, I would say, of Tennessee Williams than of Gore Vidal, but I am always fascinated by a bon vivant. Like that is an archetype, especially a queer bon vivant, that I appreciate and love a lot as kind of their sardonic truth-telling, role as a raconteur. Using a lot of French words today in preparation for our in preparation for
also,
our
I think
movie.
I've asked you this before, but have you ever seen the documentary Best of Enemies?
Oh yeah,
Where
absolutely.
He gets William F. Buckley on full tilt on national TV and gets him to call him a little queer, which is like
says and threatens to beat his ass.
Which is like, it sounds like in 2023, it sounds like, oh, he got him to call him a little queer on TV. That who cares? But like for the time, like, and in the movie, it is the climax of like these two like supposed intellectuals.
And it seems like they're truly about to come to blows.
Yeah.
My Buckley has a really funny quote in that movie that I still don't really like know what he means, but he refers to the hobgoblinization of Marxists. And ever since I saw that movie for the first time, I just watched his videos, it just rings in my head, the hobgoblinization of Marxists.
Still, I feel like the tactic is just like pair Marxism with a scary word and just go with that and then make people believe
You're
it.
demons. The other thing I'll say about Gore Vidal is that and make it clear, I'm not saying that this man should work. I'm not saying that I'm like actively lamenting that he didn't fill this role. I'm just a little bit lamenting that we like never got it into the universe, and maybe a new supreme cruel gay man who is not an abuser will arise who can fill this role appropriately.
Garrison Keillor.
But Kevin Spacey was supposed to play Gore Vidal in a biopic before, it was like supposed to start filming while I won't even say those revelations are coming out, because similar to Harvey Weinstein, is someone that's been on gossip forums, like on Usenet when I was like 11 years old. It's like known information.
Bryan Singer and shit.
Yeah, but we just a little bit. Again, not for Kevin Spacey himself,
it's Christmas time, so we
are
getting
a
new Kevin Spacey performance soon, right? Do you know what I'm referring to?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Where several years in a row, each Christmas, like during Christmas,
he would release the video of him talking as Frank
in character about the sexual assault allegations. Now, a lot of people have been talking out the sides of their mouth around here. God damn, the weird
Someone should throw his phone, cameras, etc. out of a window.
I want those videos. Inject that shit into my veins. They're so goddamn weird. Well, what about you? What have you been getting into lately?
I don't know, some kind of weird stuff, I guess. I this week finished a novel that is very thin that I started reading. I bought it in June when I went to Portland. It's from a press that's from the South, but I couldn't get it in person here, and then I was at Powell's in Portland when I was there for a work conference, and I saw it on their independent bookshelf or book distributors, and I was like, okay, I'll purchase that. It's called Ossia. It was published this year. It actually came out on my birthday, interestingly.
Happy birthday.
In March.
Yeah, belated.
It's a novel. It's the first novel of a poet named Sandra Simmons, who actually I won't claim that we know each other, but I have interacted with her. She worked at a college, or maybe still does, in southern Georgia, and she used to be we were mutually involved in a feminist organizing project.
Did I ever tell you that she was one of my professors?
Oh no,
yeah,
nice.
She taught my poetry workshop class in undergrad. Yeah.
And so she's great. I love her work. She's an amazing Marxist feminist poet, and I own several of her poetry monographs. But this is her first novel, and it's about Ossia Weevil, who was a poet who was the mistress of Ted Hughes when he was married to Sylvia Plath, and like at the time that Sylvia Plath took her own life, and then eventually Asia like gave birth to. She was never married to Ted Hughes, but they were in like a relationship for a period of time. She gave birth to his child, and then ultimately she also completed suicide. Yeah, he's a bad man. Ted Hughes is a bad man. Write that down.
Piece of shit.
And also killed their daughter.
Fuck.
When she completed suicide. And it is a book that is mostly written from the perspective of Asia, but it also includes some chapters written from the perspective of Sylvia Plath and some chapters written from Asia's like sister's experience. Asia survived the Holocaust and traveled, or immigrated is a better word for that, like many times, spent a little bit of time in Palestine, for example, a lot of time in London and some time in the United States after like fleeing from the Holocaust. And there are many layers, but ultimately it's about a woman who's like deeply mentally ill, trying to survive in the face of abuse and denigration. And it's really moving, and it took me so long to read it, even though it's really thin, because I had to stop reading it at some point because it was fucking me up. But if you are aware of any of these parties, I recommend that you read it. If you are someone who has like survived interpersonal violence before and like grappled with the complexities of feeling still attached to the person who's done those things to you, and you have like a little bit of emotional distance where you want to kind of ponder those things, or you feel ready to, I don't mean process them in a therapy way, I mean process them in an art way, I think this is a great novel to turn to.
Is it very like lyrical? And
yes. It's very poetic. Yeah, it's definitely, you can tell it's written by a poet,
she's
for sure.
insanely talented. She intimidated the fuck out of me when I was because she's really good, and her poems are like, I'm gonna fucking use the wrong words, but I wanted to say abstract. I won't say abstract, but like they're fucking dense, and they're like
they're lyrical is a great word for it. She like Dr. Simmons draws a lot on myth.
Yeah. They're just,
and so does this. They're
just very beautiful and lyrical, and then so you read them, and at least my perspective as a dumb guy pretending to be a smart guy sometimes is they read them and you're like, oh, that was very beautiful, I love that, what the fuck, like now I gotta go back and read it a little bit slower, and she was just intimidating, because I felt like, to me, that was the kind of like writer that I wanted to be, was like somebody that, you know, everybody wants to be a good writer. That sounds stupid, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, she just was able to capture like very dense, and her poems, if I remember, are not very long either. Yeah, they're pretty short, but like I said,
some of them, I think some of her more recent stuff is longer, but I mean, honestly, there is some like structural similarity between like the way Sylvia Plath wrote and her poetry and the way a lot of Sandra's poetry takes form. Her poetry monograph I like the most is called Utopia, like utopia, but with an A instead of a U at the front. And yeah, I think she just has this style and like subject that it feels very reminiscent of like the mid 20th century like women's movement, but is endeavoring to be I would say like a little harder edged and like more explicitly Marxist in her work. I definitely recommend.
Hell yeah. I think I read Warsaw Bikini was definitely one of them, and then I can picture the cover of the other one, but I can't remember the name of it.
Does it have leaves on it?
I feel like it's more abstract and like diamonds and squares and shit.
Okay, because Utopia has like green leaves on it. That's why I'm
so ringing endorsement for actual smart people and dumb people who like me, who like to pretend to be smart.
Then I saw a movie in theaters, I think last week, or maybe the week before, maybe it was right after we recorded the previous episode, that is based on a book. called EILEEN.
And what do we think?
I loved it.
Okay.
I will say,
because you were on the fence because you said you didn't really like.
Well, I like her, like Otessa Mongfei. I like am very, like thematically.
You like her work.
Her
you
a
just
lot.
Disconnected from the presentation, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like I go very back and forth on her. Like I react to her in kind of extreme ways. I would say, like, there is no middle ground for me with her. I loved it.
Hell yeah.
Oh my god. But I will say, as the credits were rolling, Mike, who was there with me, turned to me and went, "What the fuck? Why did you make me come see this?" So I'm going to separate it totally. I think I mentioned this last time that I was looking forward to this. I've read some of the book, but not all of it. I'm going to essentially completely detach it from that, because the thing that I really loved about the movie is that it really felt like, again, kind of like this mid 20th century thriller, or like some giallo. Have you ever seen the movie Identikit? It is an Elizabeth Taylor movie that is I think technically considered a giallo, but it the flavor of it feels a little bit more like cross-pollinated with kind of a mid-20th century American melodrama.
Okay.
And that is what this movie felt like. Plus, it had just this really nasty, filthy, like layer onto it that does not turn away from women being bad people. Okay. And I wouldn't say that's like revolutionary, but as someone that does like those kind of various subgenres that I just listed, and oftentimes women are just like the victims of them. Someone having some agency, even if that agency is levied towards being gross.
Yeah.
I really liked it. Also, the music in it is music I listen to all the fucking time.
And you know what I didn't put in my notes for when we talk about the movie we're going to talk about, but I'm going to put it in there, is the fucking music and the movie we're here to discuss.
Yes.
I fucking love that shit. How was Anne Hathaway?
Amazing. I mean, there's a scene where Anne Hathaway and Thomasin McKenzie, who plays like EILEEN, the main character, are drunk in a bar that is like a grimy, like the only bar in the city. And Anne Hathaway is positioned as, so much more smarter and beautiful and glamorous, like than the setting would permit. And Thomasin McKenzie's character EILEEN is like pretending to try and rise to that level, right? It's kind of a like, is she imitating her? Does she want to fuck her? Like, there's all these things are commingling, and they're dancing to "Tell Him" by the Exciters, which is like one of my. I've brought it up before on the podcast. I love 60s girl group music, and they're just like drunk and dancing, and it's like kind of erotic and like a little awkward, and there's like kind of this undercurrent of danger because there's like a bunch of grimy men that are like watching and lurking, and I was like, yeah, this is a movie.
Hell yeah.
For me,
so
personally.
Award buzz for Anne. Is the dream gonna come true again? That was mean. She gets too much grief for being a little awkward.
I love her. I think it's just
but that was one of the cringiest things.
Well, I think it's just people don't like
earnestness,
and being honestly, a theater kid is like a weird inversion of it, because it's like you're so earnest about not being earnest. Something like it folds back upon itself. I put
myself in that category a little bit, like
theater people are incredibly annoying to talk to.
Earnestness, like I think two big things happened that made people dislike her, and I think one is completely unfair, which is that James Franco hosting disaster, because she was just doing the job and was trying her best.
Yeah.
I did find that award speech when she won, that shit made my spine tingle in a bad way. I realized that was when she said it came true. I was like, oh boy.
I mean, it's hard because, again, kind of related to the earnestness. Like, I know the idea that I'm sorry, do we not want the people who get Oscars to have dreamed about it, to have pursued it, to have oriented their life, their skills, their development of talent towards like accomplishing that? Like,
I don't disagree
you're supposed
with
to
her.
want it, but not too bad. I
don't disagree with her, but regardless,
see, I think the thing
her,
for
though.
me
She's
is that I find
everything.
theater people to be incredibly annoying to interact with on a like day-to-day level. Like, right, if we're just at a bar or like
you're not
hanging
you're
out,
not feeling like treading the boards when you're at bar trivia.
That's exactly what I expect of her in that setting. Is my thing, right? Like, if we're at Publix and you're like staging
a
moment,
flash mob of
calm down. If you're on stage, the Chinese theater, go ahead. Tell me that's your dream, baby.
Did you see Colossal?
I don't think so.
It's a weird ass movie. It's made by Nacho Vigalondo, the guy that did Time Crimes. If you ever saw that, which is a cool movie. But it is a woman who's like just a fucking mess, and she is like dropped out of college. Or out of med school, I think, and moves back home, and through some weird cosmic connection at the same time, a insanely hundreds of foot tall Godzilla Monster has appeared in, I think it's Seoul, South Korea. And what she realizes is every time she goes back into the this childhood playground in her neighborhood, the monster materializes halfway across the world and mimics her actions. So every time she's fucking around in the playground, this monster appears and is just destroying buildings and shit. And it's just a weird allegory for dealing with your childhood fucked upness and having to return home. And it's really weird and it's funny. And Jason Sudeikis is in it, and plays the old love interest. But it's cool. Yeah,
that sounds good. I mean, I like her a lot.
I love her too. I was giving her some shit, but I really, really like her. And I've always been a defender, despite what it sounds like now.
Despite what it sounds like. And I think it seems to me that her earnestness extends across her life, because I think it's really brutal that all the horrible stuff with her ex-husband happened basically right around the time. So she was married to a guy who's a total con artist. Right? No, he was a total con artist. Or he pretended
to be some sort of okay.
He's a total con artist, and he stole a scammer and stole a bunch of money from her, and was doing it was ultimately arrested, I think, for running financial scams on other people and stuff like that. And that was all right around the time of her Oscar run. And to me, it's just symptomatic of the fact that obviously on some level, not to overly psychologize or read too much into it, but she's a person who is so genuine in seeking affection and support, that she was preyed upon in this way. And then those are also the same things that make her that prime her acting skills and that also turn people against her. So it's she was a victim of something that should lead to public tide turning in her favor, but then also at the same time she's being cruelly spoken of. So I don't know, not that she needs me to defend her, but I'm a fan of hers.
The worst industry to be earnest in.
Because
everyone, I think, me, is just you are coming in being what the fuck is wrong with you? What do you want from us, famous person? And when they're earnest, you're what's the end game?
Right. Well, and it's hard because I imagine that there is a lot that she has encountered. I'm not even talking about the personal life stuff that we were just talking about, but in terms of the industry attempting to harden you and stomp that out of you. And so and she's got a beautiful smile. I love her. So she is fucking great in EILEEN, and I liked it a lot. The other movie that I wanted to bring up, this I rented Blu-ray from Cap City Video Lounge. It's called Successive Slidings of Pleasure.
Ooh.
And it is an erotic art house film.
Hell yeah.
About a young woman who commits crimes and lies, or maybe is not lying, unclear, about like what has propelled her to do this and like what is happening to her while she's being held in captivity in the jail. That's cool. And like kind of fantasizing about it. So part of why I wanted to bring it up, aside from obviously demonstrating how smart and cultured I am, right, is because the director of it is the guy who wrote the screenplay for Last Year at Marienbad.
Hell yeah. I love that movie.
Which you've brought up before. I think maybe when we were talking about Brunel, maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that guy's name is Alain Robbe-Grillet. And it is, I have not seen that movie. I've not watched it, and I had not seen it when you talked about it, and I haven't watched it in the time since. But based on your description of it and what I know about it, it seems like that it's very similar in terms of like lack of foundational truth,
right?
And like what is real is evolving and perceptual. And except
unreliable
it's done,
narrator, unreliable setting.
Everyone is unreliable. But it's done through like an erotic art house perspective, and there's a lot of the movie that is just them like recreating performance art pieces from the mid 20th century that I'm cool. aware of, but done so like Yves Klein.
That sounds very Buñuel-y too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Right, exactly. They definitely like all kind of part and parcel of the same spirit of art, right, of the time. But there's this fine artist Yves Klein who did like these performance pieces where he used his specific blue paint, which is called Yves Klein blue, and like painted women's naked bodies and had them like go on canvases that were like on the walls and then sold them. I guarantee you and you listener have probably almost certainly seen these paintings before. So they do that in the movie, but they do it with blood, so it's all like red. Yeah. And there's several things like that in the film. So I wouldn't say that it's like where you walk away and you're like, well, I really stewed on that, or like I learned something. But it's just like the wiles of a woman's erotic imagination.
Well, it's like Last Year at Marienbad. It's like that was cool as fuck, and also what the fuck was that?
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of what I've been getting into lately.
Cool. Well, what is going on in the wider world that's either got you celebrating or living in despair?
Well, so I wanted to bring up a recent lawsuit that was filed about Alabama's exploitation of incarcerated people's labor. Have you seen about this? I have
seen a little bit, yeah.
Okay. So I think it was a little over a week ago. I think it was like last Tuesday. They filed in a middle district court in Alabama. So I want to read a little bit from an AFL-CIO press release that kind of just gets down to the facts of the matter that came out that day. So they released some writing that said the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, AFL-CIO, and the Union of Southern Service Workers, which is affiliated with SEIU, joined incarcerated workers and a local community organization to file a class action lawsuit in response to the systematic exploitation and forced labor of Alabama's incarcerated population. The suit alleges that the Alabama Department of Corrections denies Black Alabamans parole at twice the rate of their white counterparts in order to maintain a cheap labor force through wrongful detention. And though Black Alabamans are only a quarter of the state's residents, they make up over 50% of the incarcerated population. So basically, they're alleging that the Alabama Department of Corrections is leasing quote unquote leasing convicts to businesses at low rates. And this practice has a long and storied history. The Equal Justice Initiative reports that the state legislature in Alabama began doing this, leasing its state penitentiary to private business owners in 1846. So this even like predates the abolition of slavery.
When everybody started doing it.
Right. And then the Washington Post reports that this attempt at impact litigation. So impact litigation is when you try and sue to change the law, basically. And we know that this is impact litigation because it's coordinated effort between multiple social movement organizations. And one of the parties to the case is Robert Earl Counsel, who goes by the name Kinetic Justice. And he's a prisoner who co-founded the Free Alabama movement. So it's like very explicitly politicized, being done to try and target these unjust regulations. And they're suing under an anti-trafficking act. And it states that fast food restaurants like KFC, Burger King, McDonald's, as well as state entities like the city of Montgomery, Alabama, and manufacturing firms have benefited from the system of exploitation, while the Department of Corrections like nickels and dimes incarcerated workers with fees, leaving them with pay as low as $2 an hour. So what happens is like an incarcerated worker who demonstrates quote unquote good behavior can get like a quote unquote better job than inside the prison with like McDonald's, for example, and then maybe they make $12 an hour there, but then the Department of Corrections charges them for them being the incarcerated worker for transportation to and from the prison to work, for their uniforms and laundry, like for any number of things, and then people are left with like pennies.
Yeah,
basically.
Fucked up.
It's wild. So I know you and I both love Killer Mike.
Yes, indeed.
So it made me think about it's reflected in Killer Mike's set of Killer Mike's lyrics from Reagan, from the album R.I.P. Music, where he said, "But thanks to Reaganomics, prison turns a profit because free labor is the cornerstone of U.S. economics.
Slavery was abolished unless you are in prison. You think I ambush it and then read the 13th Amendment? Involuntary servitude and slavery it prohibits. That's why they giving drug offenders time in double digits. Ronald Reagan was an actor, not at all a factor."
So yeah, and we'll drop a bunch of, I've got some different sources if you're interested in that. And I also wanted to include, the blog for the Free Alabama movement directly. I think a lot of times we learn about maybe social movement organizing and actions that are being done in other states or regions outside of our own, and we're only getting it through like that news media perspective. But it's good to go and like support those people directly. Also, there's some really great investigative journalism work that happened, I think that came out last year, about this process and these practices in Arizona, that really gets like into the nitty gritty of it. So we'll include those sources as well.
Yeah,
but
hell yeah.
How about you, Craig?
Well, I want to talk about kind of worker exploitation as well, but with a little bit more of a happy situation, most likely. And it's not over yet, but are you aware of the Tesla strikes that are going on in Sweden?
I've heard a little bit about it, but I look forward to digging in more. What's going on?
Hell yeah. So, first off, if you've listened to this for any amount of time, you know that I like watching Elon Musk for all of his shenanigans, but sometimes it's frustrating because like there's only so many times you can watch a guy like step on his own dick and then still win in the end because he operates in America and like everything caters to idiots like that. But that's not how things work in other countries. So basically, what's happened on October 27th, workers in Sweden went on strike against Tesla after Elon Musk refused to sign a collective bargaining agreement with Sweden's IF Metal, which would have basically set a minimum wage for the about 130 factory workers in Sweden who do the repairs on Tesla automobiles. And because Elon is a fucking moron and thinks everywhere is run like the United States, capitalist dystopia, he has now found himself in a labor war in which he absolutely will not win. And the reason is because Sweden is a country where like 100% nearly of their workforce is protected by unions and collective bargaining agreements. Actually, side note too, because this is the thing that I always get annoyed at when conservatives like to point out this when, Scandinavian countries are pointed at as like places where socialism works. I'm specifically thinking of, because again, brain rot, and I watch too much of assholes like this on the internet, but Steven Crowder had a clip several years ago that went like insanely viral because he like owned and destroyed and cucked a college kid about socialism in Scandinavian countries, where essentially the talking point they love is, well, did you know that Sweden doesn't have a minimum wage? Which is true, and the reason it is true is because they don't need a fucking minimum wage because their unions and their collective bargaining have power and can set the minimum wages for their workers. So that shit annoys me anyway. So anyways,
also, Elon, I know this is not the overarching point, but I just have to say it so that, someone does not say this. These Scandinavian countries are not even socialist. They're extremely
socialist policies.
But it's not even socialism because they're not. It's not state owned, meaning the means of production.
Right. Yeah.
It's really advanced social democratic policies, which is amazing and great, and even more of a testament to the fact that like those things can be. I don't want to say an intermediary step in terms of like progress of strict progression, but just there are ways that workers can be protected under social democratic policies without even being socialist.
So where the Elon of it all fits in is he's basically now at war with his own workers, which is something, he's not. That obviously there's been stories about like Tesla workers in the U.S. except surprise bitch, because these Nordic countries are not like the U.S. and I'm sure Elon was not aware of sympathy strikes, which Elon's penny pinching ways and his capitalistic hubris of trying to fuck over the people that make and fix his shitty cars has resulted in more international strikes against Tesla. As we discussed in the Harlan County, USA episode, strikers in the U.S. are all but irrelevant after decades of anti-union and right-to-work legislation, but that's not how it works in Sweden and other Nordic countries. After Elon's hostile actions towards workers in Sweden, the striking workers have been joined by workers in Denmark, Finland, and Norway, all participating in sympathy strikes. And these aren't just sympathy strikes from other Tesla workers. These are people that have nothing to do with the Tesla industry now making life fucking terrible for Elon, because they are, long story short, there are cleaning companies who are now refusing to clean Tesla offices, garbage collectors who won't pick up their trash, the postal service isn't delivering their mail, and car dealerships in Sweden aren't stocking Teslas. Cab companies in Scandinavian countries have stopped buying Teslas for their companies. Denmark's largest trade union, called 3F, has pledged to block the transit of all Teslas to Sweden, and Finland is now doing the same. And like stepping on his dick even more, Elon has posted on Twitter a couple times, at one point calling them insane, which is now just causing his investors to panic, which they're already doing. But yeah, there's no way for him to come out on top here. Like it's gonna either end loudly or he's gonna quietly acquiesce, because there's no fucking way for him to win here. So yeah, solidarity forever, because it fucking works, clearly on display with this Tesla bullshit in Sweden.
Right, like he's just so dumb, because it's like, what does he think his leverage point is? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
like it's not as if he can go in to revisit the Harlan County, USA,
right? Yeah.
Right? It's not like he can go into 4 different countries and like
pistol
violently repress.
Yeah.
Like, what's your plan here, bro?
I mean,
he doesn't fucking have one because he's dumb.
Because he's been doing it. It's worked for him for years in the U.S. of just being like loud and obnoxious and pig-headed and just bulldozing your way into what you want, and that's just not how it fucking works over there. And like, he's already embarrassed himself and he's not relenting, so he's just like, I don't know, maybe my glasses are way too rose-colored, but I don't see any fucking way that he can win this specific battle. So
we cheer his downfall.
Honestly, yes, he looks like a fucking idiot, which he is, which is great. So, are we ready to move into talking about the movie?
Yeah.
Hell
so
yeah.
Today we are covering the Battle of Algiers.
Fucking awesome.
And before we get into the movie directly, I wanted to dig a little bit into the history of French colonization of Algeria. You know, here on this podcast, we like history.
Mm-hmm.
One, because it provides context for the struggle that we see depicted on screen in the movie that we're taking as today's subject. But also, two, because the case is instructive for understanding maybe parts of the struggle or facets of the struggle today, which we'll see as we draw some historical parallels later while actually talking about the movie and like some of the tactics that they use. So, France invaded Algeria in 1830. Why? While synthesizing across different kind of historical and movement texts that we'll link to in the sources, Algeria had a powerful fleet that dominated the Mediterranean Sea. And as capitalism took hold and the drive for territorial expansion and resource domination ballooned, so did the focus on squelching Algeria. The United States actually tried to do so first in 1815. We mostly failed, and then followed by France. By 1834, Algeria was annexed by France. So during that period of time, during the colonization period, France adopted what's called a total war strategy and aimed for absolute social closure, meaning there was absolute segregation and exclusion from formal political life for Algerian people in French Algeria. The Algerian people were totally pushed out of skilled labor roles, right? We hear referred to in this movie, there's the Muslim quarter or the Arab quarter and the French quarter or the European quarter. Like everything is like absolutely divided. And across the 1830s and 1840s, the French army killed about 1 million Algerian people. In the 1840s in particular, the Armée d'Afrique, right, or African Army of France, relied on brutalizing scorched earth tactics, like lighting fires in caves to which Algerian people had fled to take refuge. I mean, it's really fucking horrible, brutalizing stuff. So, and I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here, which again, this will come up. We'll draw some historical parallels when we talk about the movie itself. But while I was doing some research, I found some really interesting writings by historians that looked at how what France was doing in Algeria during the colonization period reflected back onto revolutions that were happening in France. So if you're not super familiar with French history, French pop off all the time. Like, there is not a singular French Revolution. I mean, there's the French Revolution that we think about, but France would, like, the proletariat were going off all the time. And there are a lot of connections between what was going on simultaneously in Algeria and in mainland France. So not long...
by this time they've had like 3 major ones, right? In the last like 50
yeah,
years
and I'm about to talk about then there's the February days in 1848 and the June days in 1848. Like, again, the French proletariat are popping off at this time. So not long after the annexation in 1848, the Second Republic, which is what they call the Second Republican government of France, banned slavery across their empire. Now, formal emancipation did not mean that the domination inherent in the colonial relationship had totally been exercised. When the February days kicked off, so it was February 1848, which was civil unrest against King Louis Philippe, kicked off, generals who had gained experience in the Armée d'Afrique, so the African Army of France, were placed in key positions in the Second Republic government. So these were folks that, right, have essentially been trained in Algeria and are now back in mainland France in key positions. They were in the command of governmental forces in Paris, the head of the National Guard, and the command of street patrols. Then in June 1848, under the guidance of a former governor of the Algerian settlement, his name is Cavaignac, 1,500 French insurgents were killed when they revolted in response to Second Republican threats to close the national workshops, which were state labor sites for the unemployed. It was basically like a factory that the government owned that was a vehicle for distributing state benefits to poor people. Now, historian Jennifer Session advances the argument that colonial violence abroad was tied to repressive tactics used against revolutionary working class movements at home. Again, this is a theme that we'll kind of pick up again later. But what was practiced against the people native to Algeria between 1830 and 1848 was simply practice for the L'Armée Afrique veterans who directed their energies towards suppressing the revolting proletariat on the French mainland. These veterans, trained in colonial violence and now funneled towards dissent in the metropole, initially continued to serve the king, but after his regime fled into exile, they adapted swiftly to the provisional Republican government and retained their roles or gained new influence as, say, the Minister of War or in the Constituent Assembly. We even see that dissidents from France were deported to Algeria after the Second Republic ended the death penalty for those accused of political crimes. So we see this like dynamic where what's happening in the metropole or the mainland, right, the entity that controls the colony, is like using the colony to like subsidize their own liberty and freedom at the center.
Can you imagine living in a country like that?
I know. It's so crazy. This is definitely all ended for sure. This doesn't happen anymore, right? The Second Republic also looked to the settlement as a solution for raging unemployment at the colonial center, sending the French there. So elites viewed sending the proletariat to Algeria as a replacement for the now defunct national workshops, guaranteed work. Migration and settlement of the French was presented as a solution both foreign and domestic. It would subsidize the cost of colonization for France and diffuse dissent at home by getting those people the fuck out of there. Though many died of diseases like cholera, settlement continued and France extended male European settlers voting rights and representation on the National Assembly in Algeria. So, again, to return to her work, historian Jennifer Sessions argues that this bonded the settlers to the French Republican system, consolidated power in the interest of French Algerians. So the French people that were sent to Algeria now have an investment back in the mainland and in making the colony work for them. By the 1870s in Algeria, military rule was replaced by a full civilian administrative government. And then from the end of the 19th century through the beginning of the 20th century, the European population in Algeria just continues to grow and bloom. Then in 1917, Mr. Vladimir Ilyich, Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, Lenin, storms onto the scene. Now, not to be overly reductive or rely too much on a model of hero history, but as we've seen time and time again, and we talked about repeatedly on the podcast, anti-colonial sentiment is tied to the shifting global tides following the Russian Revolution. Though I'll note, like, ultimately, Algeria was much more aligned with the Chinese in this Sino-Soviet split. The Algerian cause's alignment with the global socialist transformation was attributable to several factors, such as having a network of material and ideological support. For example, China and other members of the bloc donated arms to the struggle, and also assessment of political opportunity, which we might conceive of as like momentum or likelihood of success, right? If you look at other people being successful in their anti-imperialist and socialist movements, then you go, hey, we could like probably do that too, right? And on the second point, we also can't understate the impact of France's failures in Indochina, right? France failed. We talked about this during the Platoon episode, right?
Yeah.
So France failed dramatically in maintaining the colony in
Vietnam.
Yeah. And so that happens, right, as a precursor to what we see in this movie. Finally, we also see the anti-colonial and anti-fascist struggle are intertwined. So the fact that World War I and World War II happen also is super important. We see, for example, that the communist and socialist parties of Algiers in 1945 call for anyone who had been involved in the Vichy administration, which were like the French collaborators with Nazis, right, to be purged from Algerian command. So there's a lot happening globally that's like suffusing through this struggle. Now, while the world conspired to craft the opening of the window of opportunity, as we just described, we also know that the colonials' control over agriculture, that they prevented native Algerians from participating in most sectors of the labor market, that they gobbled up the land, and that they broke apart the tribal system that had acted as traditional social bonds and organizations, leaving many of the Algerians unemployed and with jack shit to lose, frankly. Like, you've already destroyed everything, right? So the colonialists sowed the seeds of their own destruction. The stage was now free, and the players were motivated and available. Then, in March 1954, Ahmed Ben Bella, a former French army officer who had been exiled to Egypt due to his leftist political beliefs, and several other political exiles, get together to form the National Liberation Front, or what is referred to throughout this movie as FLN. That's because in French, Liberation Nationale goes after the noun. So we put the adjectives before the noun. They put it after, so that's why it's listed as FLN. That's how we'll refer it. And that is where our film adventure begins.
Hell yeah. This movie is fucking awesome.
It is.
I want to say first, like, my preconceived notions of it, because I've never seen it before, and I was always aware of it as like an important film or whatever. And I don't know, sometimes this, again, dumb guy thoughts here, but like sometimes like the important films are like, you feel like, God damn it, I'm gonna watch this. It's gonna be really dry and like scholarly, which is like fine, you know, if it is, it is. But God, no, this is like tense as shit.
So good.
It is a thriller from like top to bottom. There are like scenes that are just like edge of your seat, like what the fuck is happening? Like, yeah, it is great. I love this shit.
I love it. I'm with you. I don't think it's like dumb guy shit. I think there's like a couple of things colluding against it, which is that like history is not, even though I love history is not always presented in exciting terms or sense-making terms. Or the opposite happens where it's like too formalized and too stated. It's like A happened, then B happened, then C happened, right? There's no like art or mystery or magic to it. And also, frankly, I mean, I'm gonna say it, I like a lot of black and white movies, but knowing that a movie is in black and white and historical film, if I had known, which I think you're going to talk about in a second, that it was more in an Italian neo-realist tradition, I would have watched it way sooner.
Well, that was the other thing is, and I want to talk about this too, but the like, also the newsreel aspect of it all,
Yes.
which is what I knew about it. And frankly, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal in 2023 standards. Like, I don't know. I want to talk about that too, because it is like, part of it is that it was originally meant to look like newsreel footage, like when in the 60s when you'd go to the movie theater and they'd show like footage from Vietnam
reels
before
ahead of time,
or whatever.
right?
Because I guess neorealism was established in Italy, but it wasn't mainstream or whatever. So everything that like talks about it and looks back on it is like the newsreel aspect. It's so real. And even like on HBO, it had like documentary as part of one of the tags. And when I told my dad we were doing this, he was like, "Oh, the old newsreel movie." And I was like, "Okay, yeah." But once you're watching it, it's like, I don't know, that kind of goes out the window, and it just feels more like what we would call like, I don't know, cinema verite or whatever,
right?
Just gritty griminess of it.
And I think
which works like hella good, but
it only really has those aspects of the newsreel feeling when the crowd gets very large.
Yeah.
And at the very end.
Yeah, and it'll do like little flares that like a hard zoom in or a hard zoom out that feels like a newsreel thing.
But all the stuff that's like in people's homes or that is following like the actual tactical actions being carried out by individuals, it really doesn't have.
And I'm wondering if
that hard line feeling to it.
Is like one of the first like huge. It wasn't even that huge, but I'm trying to just figure out where the distinction that everyone, that maybe it's just people I talk to, but everyone that I've like spoken to about is like, oh, the newsreel movie, and I was like, okay, I don't know, maybe there just weren't a lot of like handheld. Kind of like guerrilla style filmmaking coming out then, or at least not in America.
It's so interesting because that is not something that I walk away having watched this the first time. Well, I'll say I watched it 3 times, which Mike was
really?
Can you stop?
Damn, hell yeah.
But he's like, again, you're going to spend all your Canopy tickets for the month on watching this one movie over and over again.
I gotta get that still.
But until you raise that, I would say that, I mean, it's in my notes as something that's obviously stylistically relevant, but I would not consider it to be like the dominant mode of communication of the film. Like,
which is, I think, also why I thought of it as kind of a dry movie, is because it's always described as like newsreel style. And no, this is like a fucking thriller, like a political thriller. It's cool as shit. But yeah, let's quickly talk about like where it fits into like Italian neorealism, because Battle of Algiers was made in 1966, which doesn't quite fit in that first wave of Italian neorealism of the late 40s and 50s, which was, after the execution of Benito Mussolini in 1945, filmmakers like Vittorio De Sica and Roberto Rossellini and Michelangelo Antonio started focusing stories on the trials and tribulations of Italy's working class.
Antonioni.
These films frequently feature non-actors shot on location and depicting the struggles of everyday people rebuilding their lives in the wake of World War II. Battle of Algiers, released in 1966, is 100% influenced by and a neorealist movement, but fits more in with some of the French new waves that are coming out at the same time, which took that neorealist style and experimented with the form, finding new ways to tell the story, which I think is also maybe where some of that newsreel ideas fit in, is that kind of experiment with the form of neorealism. But yeah, like we said, Battle of Algiers was shot in part to imitate that newsreel footage, kind of dropping the viewer into the streets and into the cramped hideouts of the National Liberation Front. But I just love, we're obviously going to talk more in depth about the substance of it, but the style of it is really fucking cool too.
Yeah, I think that maybe this is a not even half-formed idea. So
those are my best ones.
But as I reflect on it, I think that maybe some of that I mean, again, I'm not saying it's not present stylistically or people are reading things into it that aren't present. But I think maybe some of it is that, like, if you know anything about movements, they would never, I mean, this movement operates because of its secrecy, its tight-knit structure, and the total lack of penetration from outside groups. And so I think maybe that's part of why, like, it totally maintains its fiction frame for me, is because it's only through fiction that we can access these inner chambers. I don't know. Whereas maybe like if you're someone that doesn't spend as much time engaging with and thinking about movements. You're like, yeah, it looks like a newsreel, but the news can't ever be there, which is part of the the point.
The disconnect,
right.
But yeah, let's get into some of the plot elements here.
So I just want to say,
you were ready for something.
Well, so this is not super in depth, but we open up with a torture scene, and
there's a bunch of fucked up.
There's a lot of fucked up violence in this movie.
Oh, and one thing we'll definitely get to is like how much I was going like, God damn, this could be like remake this, and it could be a war in Iraq movie where like much of it
absolutely
is mirrored almost exactly by like America's colonial wars in the 2000s.
It's such a good point, and we will talk about this more in terms of some of those threads of like what's happening in the metropole versus what's happening in the periphery of the colony. But it's also interesting because maybe this is coming up for me because last night I was an insane person and I watched Saving Private Ryan starting at 11 p.m.
Oh, cool. So you were up till real late on that.
I was making
a long movie.
Fake cookies out of clay for my tablescaping, and I was looking for a movie, and
I thought that was a
brought
prank.
It before. No.
Fake cookies.
No.
Gotcha, sucker. You broke your tooth on a goddamn piece of pottery.
I would never try and break anyone's tooth after my teeth struggles.
Yeah.
But also it's like that soft clay. But anyway, I started doing that, and Mike was like, why are you putting this movie on? You're never going to stay awake for 3 hours. And I was like, watch me. But during the beginning of it, I was like, we really don't make war movies like the war epics like this anymore. And I think part of that is the obviously such significant transformation in the form that warfare takes.
Right. Yeah.
But you saying that, this was not even originally the point I was going to bring up, but you saying that about making something like this about the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan is that this movie is obviously much closer to that by nature of the way that the guerrilla warfare takes place.
And the colonial response as well. Yeah.
But it dates functionally to right after all of our big World War II films. That does not really going anywhere. I just need to chew on that. But the thing that I was going to say,
I think also like World War II was kind of the last war that was fought in that style.
That way, right?
In that, like, we're gonna line up and just fucking shoot at each other, and then
and there are distinct war zones.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. After that, it really becomes the insurgents.
Yeah, and also
battlefield.
This might be a dumb guy thought, and there might just one that I'm not thinking of. But World War II is also the last one where the good guys were pushing against, for lack of a better word, the colonizers. Whereas every other war after that was the colonizers were the ones. Fuck, I just lost that thread. But like, fuck, I'm cutting that out. Completely forgot what I was trying to say.
No problem.
Or where I was getting. Let me mark that. Because I sounded too stupid. 1077. Oh, wait, that's my other notes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the maybe a piece of the thought you're getting at is that, the ability to make claims about who is the good guy.
Yeah, and the way that like you would and the way armies would fight in response to that, whereas like World War II you're pushing back an invasion, and all the other wars after that we are the invasion and are fighting a completely different style of warfare, I guess.
Right, but part of that
Cut
perspective,
Craig sounding stupid.
But part of that perspective is also contingent on like vacating colonialization's role in World War II.
Yeah.
Right. But more speaks to like American perspective in film, right? Of how we conceive of...
Actually, stay that on my... I will leave this in. I don't mind if I sounded stupid. This is a good conversation. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could also take it back a few steps.
Well, I'll see how it sounds and then just wait till I can listen to how stupid I sound to decide whether or not I want to leave that in.
Okay. Well, what I could say is, before I commenced a digression, the thing that I was going to say about the beginning of this movie, and it's part of why I include successive slidings of pleasure, is because the Colonel Philippe Mathieu is in the actor. Is in Successive Sightings of Pleasure as a fucked up priest.
And he's a fucked up army guy.
So I watched that and then turned this on and I was like, ah!
Oh, you didn't know he was in?
No.
Okay.
It was not intentional.
He's great in that too. He's like very chilling and like cold and...
Well, and that's why it was such an interesting like juxtaposition of like him as like abusive, violent priest, and then like him as colonel of the colonial army. You know,
goddamn, yeah, he's great. But yeah, so our first scene is this torture scene where they've essentially the French have captured a FLN fighter and have basically tortured him until he gives up the location of our protagonist, Ali Lapointe, who is one of like four at that point. Mm-hmm. I think one of four kind of heads of the FLN in Algeria. And then from there, the movie has a very interesting structure where like it jumps back, and then we're going to get, because I think that first one was 1957, right?
Yes, it says Algeria 1957, and then we flash back to 1954, and then we just proceed and then chronologically forward, from there, basically.
Yeah. Where we meet Ali as like he's illiterate and kind of just like a street guy, just kind of like everybody in Algeria was kind of just
right. He's
living
playing.
life
He's
on
playing
the street or whatever.
3-card Monty.
Yeah.
Well, and it also opens with the National Liberation Front communique number 1. So it goes. We see the Algeria 1957, the torture scene. Ali Lapointe, hiding. We flash backward, to the FLN communique talking about ending colonialism and that their objective is an independent state formed in accordance with Islam and basic principles of liberty. And then we see Ali playing 3-card Monty.
I can do that too. I learned a trick to do good 3-card Monty.
Okay, well you're ready to become a liberation fighter.
It's just a quick sleight of hand shuffle. But yeah, and then we get where the like kind of fighting for the film begins is we see the police as kind of a tool of like colonial compliance, and the initial like offensive against that is FLN fighters basically killing policemen in the streets, both to like get the fucking police out of their streets and also to kind of preempt or prompt some larger action. And those are some awesome sequences in general. The like the assassination sequences, really, really cool.
I loved that a lot. It kind of reminded me of like mob movies or gangster movies where we get those
like, immediately, which was
right, the rapid succession of we see a plan going into place and there's people who have been coordinated to execute assassinations in multiple different places.
The baptism in Godfather and the like aftermath of the Lufthansa heist in Goodfellas were like the ones that immediately came to mind in that whole thing.
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of Scorsese and Coppola.
Those were like direct references, or like not references, but
right, like
homage,
influences. Yeah, I don't know, but I do think that it speaks to the fact that, like I said at the up top, right? I love when a movie, and it's a reoccurring theme of the podcast, I love when a movie depicts organizing and like social movement entities in a way that captures how they actually function. And I think something that's so powerful about those scenes is that it demonstrates that people can engage in coordinated collective action that is high risk across a space simultaneously. Like it really has that impactful moment of like the org is everywhere, like the org can win this, and I don't know if it's like an intentional homage or if it's just like an incidental that everyone has kind of figured out like that's the best way of communicating that
those
idea.
Are two, like, highly film literate dudes that just, like, absorbed it and
I don't know what the origin point of that is, right? Like where the style what was the first, but it also just made me think like that we deserve better movies about social movement organizing,
sure,
because it just made me think of the possibilities of leveraging filmic technique like that for, you know, talking about the quote unquote Arab Spring, for example. Like what happened in Algeria.
Get Marvel to do an Arab Spring movie is what
sure. You know, what was happening in Algeria in 2008. Like I would love to see a movie that takes that, like, on the ground, again, using filmic technique and leveraging it to give the sense of, like, organization in the face of lack of organization. Yeah, I don't know. It just made me, like, lust for better movies than we have now about, like, contemporary movements. Yeah.
So 45 minutes in is when we meet the aforementioned Philippe Mathieu. Am I saying that right?
Philippe Mathieu.
Who is the kind of cold-hearted, like, strong arm of the French military in Algeria, who at near the beginning says that his job at hand is about policing more than the military, which reflects the fact. Oh no, that's what you wrote. I was trying to read it as a quote, and then I was like, oh, I'm stumbling into something.
So he says, Philippe Mathieu says that the job at hand, like, the thing that seems to make him unique as a leader for the French bullshit is that he conceives of the role of France in suppressing the FLN as more about policing than being about military force. And that was a really standout moment for me because, and this goes back to kind of what I was talking about in the historical intro, because it reflects the fact that what happens at the periphery, meaning this is like language that we use to talk about colonialization, right? The periphery being colonies, the center being, or the core being France. At the periphery feeds into what happens at the core. And the fact that we see that, so I want to reiterate that historical example from the intro about the 1848 repression of revolutionary movements in France and what was happening in Algeria as a colony. But we also see this, like, in Ferguson and the 2020 uprisings, right, where, like, cops are militarized and the difference between cops and a military response is, like, essentially there is no difference.
Literally black bagging protesters and shit.
Right. And, like, we see this in Palestine.
There's a lot of fucking parallels in this movie between Israel and Palestine right now too.
Yeah, so I just thought that, you know, I'm always constantly embroiled in this struggle between, like, trying to avoid sensationalism around what's currently happening, right? Of, like, this has happened before, and seeing the historical parallels. And I think that there's a lot of hope that can come from that, of, like, looking at what was successful before. But on the other hand, it can also be kind of hard to stomach of, we have not
60
like
years later
struggled and outgrown this. Right.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about my favorite scene in the movie.
Okay.
My favorite sequence, which is the bombing sequence of the three women escaping the Casbah to the French Quarter. Holy shit, that whole thing is great. I love that so much.
I agree.
So in the movie, they make reference to the fact that the Algerian men are much more heavily scrutinized by the police than women. So the FLN begins using female fighters essentially to go places and do things that the male fighters couldn't do. One, concealing guns because they didn't get searched nearly as much. And then this sequence where they have three FLN members dress up like, well, not like French women. They just don't look necessarily Algerian. They look like more Parisian, I guess, like, you know, flouncy dresses
through their
and shit.
like style of clothing.
Yeah. And a like incredibly tense sequence where they have to like cross the perimeter or the border between the French Quarter and the Casbah, and like really good moments of like how we see how dehumanizing it is to be an Algerian at the time, where like literally just manhandling Algerians, and then like French people just like, bonjour, sir, and all that.
Bonjour.
But yeah, these three women go in and then split up because they have three different targets, and the editing in this sequence is awesome, like cutting back and forth, the like picking up the bomb. It's so tense. It reminded me, like, I really like Jean-Pierre Melville. Have you seen any of his like Les Samurai and all that?
Yes.
Just those like I've talked about this before, but like process moments in movies where like we could show this in 5 seconds, but we are gonna fucking stretch this out and make it as tense as possible. Like sound drop out, just kind of like follow this.
Well, it's like where you see every possible intervention point, meaning like every possible point where failure could happen.
Yeah.
And it does. It really draws out that tension because you're like, okay, they're going to get caught while they're standing in line.
Yeah.
And there's 3 women, so it's multiply, right? Everything is by 3.
Yeah.
They might get caught standing in line. They're going to get caught when they approach. They're going to get caught because one of them, there's like a foible with the person in front of them that seems like it's going to have an impact.
And the bomb maker, they have to go like pick up the bombs from the guy inside the perimeter.
And then they get through, and then they have to go to their each respective locations
where they kind of stand out a little bit.
And we see them targeting social spots.
Yeah.
And I think this is another thing that's really powerful about the movie is that we understand why they're targeting those spaces as opposed to the like parallels that you kind of bring up of thinking about Iraq or like other Middle Eastern entanglements and violence that the United States has perpetrated as part of its conquest and empire in the late 20th and 21st century. Is like we would never get any insight, right? It's like American Sniper, the people are speaking Arabic and we have no fucking subtitles, as opposed to in this where we understand from the revolutionary perspective that they are targeting the European quarter because they have to disrupt the daily lives in order for the colony to like
take notice,
to take notice and like open up a dialogue with them about getting the fuck out of there. You know.
And there is a great like I'll skip to it now because there's a great quote about I like this movie doesn't there's no apologia for the tactics, which is like we always hear now of like
we see the tactical debate but we don't ever see apology. The debate is allowed to exist in a realist, right, in a neo-realist sense for us to just engage with wholesale.
And there's a great like they address this when later in the movie one of the FLN like heads, Ben Mahidi, gets captured, and Machu like parades him in front of the media, and the journalists are asking him questions, and one journalist says, don't you think it's cowardly to hide bombs in women's baskets and handbags? And his quote is, and doesn't it seem to you even more cowardly to drop napalm bombs on defenseless villages so that there are 1,000 times more innocent victims? Of course, if we had your airplanes, it would be a lot easier for us. Give us your bombers and you can have our baskets, which is a fucking bomb-ass line.
And then there's also the journalist that makes a reference to, but like that's what we did in Germany also, or like makes a reference to World War II, and he's like, yes, you're seeing.
Yeah, right. It's point made.
It's all, You're now getting there. But one of the things, if we go back a little bit to when after the women bomb, we see Colonel Philippe Mathieu again talk about instituting martial law. And we see paratroopers roll out. So we see the kind of interplay, the back and forth dynamic that comes from movement action, right? Yeah. Like it's a response and reaction. There's an action, then there's a reaction. They're kind of tactically evolving off of interacting with each other. And then we hear him say, which I think it comes up a couple of times in the movie, but I think is so interesting because sometimes, am I going to say something that like might be a little controversial? Sometimes.
Here we go. This is what you paid for, folks.
The Holocaust and World War II are being part of like the European resistance to the Nazis is used as a sweeping declaration about one's goodness or worthiness.
Oh, right. Like how they call them paratroopers specifically. They don't paratroop into Algeria as far as I'm concerned. It was just like, wasn't it just the regiment that was like...
Well, so all the paratroopers come out, and then Mathieu says that he was part of the French anti-Nazi resistance. They're using
like the valor of World War II to justify their existence in Algeria.
Right. As if to say like I was pointed in this direction and like, now therefore, and that was just, and therefore now because I'm pointed in this direction, that is also just.
Right. We stopped Hitler, so let us run your city.
It comes up later. I can't remember if it's he says it or one of the other leaders says like they survived Dachau. And so it's like we see that these are used as ideological like justifications for like repressing anti-colonial struggle.
And it specifically stated that Machu like made his bones in like as a war hero in World War II. Like he like that's where he got the credit and the valor or whatever.
Right. So I thought that was interesting that it doesn't shy away from those complexities, right? Like it's not as if all of the French military and like policing leaders that we see on screen are like, you know, mustache twirling like I was in Vichy France, right? It's like no, like your own if you are acting on behalf of a state, liberation is like might be an incidental outcome, but it's not a guaranteed effect of your behavior and actions.
I feel like that's kind of what the U.S. did for, up until now after World War II is the same thing. Like, we stopped Hitler. The communists are worse, so you should support these efforts that we're making. I think that, I don't think that's controversial at all. I think that's like a self-evident thing that happened in history is that yes, the Allies then used the what's the word? The credit of ending World War II as a way to justify like shitty behavior from there on out. Yeah.
Right. Which is obviously like made more complex that who like really defeated Nazis on the ground in many ways. The Soviet Union.
Right, yeah. Which is, that's a big problem obviously. For a lot of them. Yeah.
Allies of convenience, but.
Which I watched, I think I said on last episode, I watched Band of Brothers recently.
Nice.
Which I know that company never really ran up against, like, the Soviets or whatever, but they are almost, it's surprising in how much, like, World War II shit that American World War II shit, the Soviets are just completely like
just not even
who the fuck when they had the most like deaths, they had the most right.
So what we hear Machu talk about this as kind of this this justifying stance, right? But then he goes into one of the, to me, most interesting parts of the movie. Again, I am interested in like how do we depict in artistic ways that really fully captures what organizing actually looks like. And he goes into a breakdown of the structure of FLN, and I thought that was super interesting to highlight. And that was the point
where I was like, oh, this is Iraq.
Yeah,
this is like the war in Iraq.
Well, and this is from a filmmaking perspective so beautifully done. We've definitely talked about before. I think contemporarily, a lot of movies, especially mass market movies, are like, I'm going to fucking tell you exactly everything that is the point because I really want to make sure that no one's lost by what I'm about to do. I love fucking older movies. Do not do that. He explains for specific in-narrative reasons that make sense. He's a commander talking to his fucking troop about here's how we're going to target them. And then later, when we hear the various FLN leaders like Ali and Jafar talk to each other and say, oh, faction 1 is dead, faction 3 is dead, whatever, we already know what they're talking about, and they don't have to sit down and go, well, remember, you recruited 2 guys, and I recruited 2 guys, and those other guys over there recruited 2 guys. Like, it's said one time, and then it just carries through throughout the movie and is demonstrated beautifully.
And I think it does a really good job at setting up like how the French military can then use that to basically justify policing anyone they want. Right. Because you see, like, so basically they call it what do they call it? The pyramid? Not pyramid scheme.
Scheme. He said pyramid
structure where, like, basically to make sure that the FLN can kind of, like, if somebody gets caught, they don't know too much about the other cells or factions.
It's super segmented. So it's like there's a person at the top, each person recruits 2 people, and then it builds out from there.
He's drawing the boxes and all that. And the part that I really liked is later they just pull a dude off the street that we never learn if he's affiliated with FLN or not. He's just accused of it, and then they put his name in the box. So it's like obviously a direct line to like, oh, we can identify some sort of structure, so that gives us carte blanche to do whatever the fuck we want and like pull dudes off the street and just be like, FLN, you're done, and no fucking clue.
And and torture as producing truth,
right? Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not the underlying veracity actually like maps onto what's happening. like that the truth is through torture is self-evident,
right.
and that they within their own internal system can hold it.
Yeah. And not
truth.
that if you're fucking putting a flame to someone's torso, they're just not going to tell you where the
right,
fuck
which is
you
a thing that
hear.
happens in this movie. There's a lot of I was like, oh my god.
My wife walked in. It was like, my wife does not like war movies. She doesn't like anything. She's a very sensitive soul, and just anything that depicts the ills of humanity, she cannot handle. So I was trying to be sensitive in watching it. And, it's not graphic or anything, but she turned the corner, and while that dude was getting tortured with a fucking like open flame,
butane torch.
And I was like, oh my bad.
Yeah, it is. There's definitely parts of it that are brutal.
Yeah, for sure.
So in the wake of hearing this breakdown of organizational structure and talking about, we don't torture, we investigate, and again, what that reveals about how the degree to which empire only cares about truth in so long as it is self-reinforcing. We then see that the question of Algeria is being raised in the UN. And that FLN is taking this as a political opportunity, as an important opening in the window of the international community giving a fuck, to call a general strike. And I think there's a lot of what is depicted around this general strike that is really smart in terms of they talk about housing the poor and the homeless to reduce risk, right? They acknowledge like these are parts of the population that might be most susceptible to the French army putting pressure on them or trying to get them to break the strike, and if we house them and feed them, then we reduce that risk. We also see them have a tactical debate about violence here, and to what extent it should continue to be used. And we also see the reactive component where the paratroopers raid, explicitly targeting people that they believe to be leading the strike.
Yeah. And he says something, I was trying to find where I had written it down. But there's a really a scene with Ali where he's clearly contemplating, is the strike good or bad? And basically his mixed feelings, he says, I didn't get the exact quote, but I got the sentiment, is basically he says, when Algerians take to the streets en masse, it will give the French every excuse they need to declare every Algerian a terrorist. So I found that kind of a fascinating look too about, goddamn, just the fear of protest itself, opening up your family, your fellow citizens to violence just by being seen protesting is fucking wild. And too.
In the scene before that, when Mathieu is going over the structure, we hear him say something to the effect of they all look alike to justify the checkpoint violence that they've been engaged in, as Algerian people move between quarters. And it's all part and parcel the same thing, right? And it does reflect back on, like you've said before, connections between Iraq, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, where when we were talking about American Sniper, talked about, the idea that military age men becomes an ideological tool.
I wrote that in my notes for when we're comparing the military age, fighting age
for
men.
For classifying any man. And the thing that is kind of in that vein here, but maybe even casts a broader net, is because it's a general strike. They're just targeting anyone who could work.
Right.
So it's the fact that a colonial domination is about absolute domination of every institution. Then that means that a strike is a possible tactic that works, but it also means that's a new avenue for interpreting who is liable to be dominated.
Right. Yeah. God, just an impossible position. Yeah.
Right.
But so we build kind of to the climax of the movie, and where we we pick up where the beginning kind of cut us off in 1957, where Mathieu and the French have surrounded Ali in his hideout and 3 other FLN members, and basically gives them an ultimatum, because we see when they captured Ben Mahidi that he wants to capture them alive, essentially to parade them around and use them as propaganda. And Ali refuses to come out, and there's like a really nice moment. I just love a moment where like people decide to like they're gonna do stuff. Like those moments of solidarity where we're doing this together, where he tells them like basically any of you can walk out now and I won't hold it against you. And they don't, and they detonate a bomb and blow up the building, killing Ali and the other FLN members. Which is a kind of an abrupt ending, and then there's the epilogue to the movie, which I really liked, which is the 1960 flash forward.
Right, that we see where the war for independence kicks back up. But something I wanted to see here is I think I may have maybe talked about this in the podcast before, but there's a sociologist who studies social movements. Her name is Donatella Della Porta. She's based in Italy, as her name might suggest. And she has studied many things, but like violence in rebellions, revolutions, and social movements is one of her areas of focus. And she has some really interesting research that looks historically and like longitudinally at how does state violence, or what is often referred to as repression, right, affect like likelihood of subsequent mobilization. And what she has generally found is that there's a curvilinear relationship. So when repression and like violence from the state is very low, there's a very high likelihood that people will mobilize, right? Because the risk is much lower. But then at the very, very high end of the scale, there is also an effect of like when things are absolutely horrible and repression is very high and state violence is very high, then people mobilize because the sense of risk is gone. Like the risk is already so great.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we saw that in 2020. I feel like with the mass breakouts in the midst of COVID and whatnot. Yeah.
But and then I think where we see some repression having its intended outcome is kind of like in those middle zones. But it made me think about this because what we see here is that killing freedom fighters does have the effect of kind of breaking down the movement, right?
Sure.
We see like a 2-year period basically, or just almost 3-year period where there's not much action going on. And generally what I read is that historically that was accurate. The movie is not just like making that up. And people did kind of go into like a rebuilding moment. But then, we see another eruption when it seems like things have started to kind of fall into their kind of like standard
going back to
normal,
to the status
quote
quo.
unquote normal. Right.
Yeah, which is really like for a movie that's not very uplifting, I found that ending fairly uplifting.
Yeah. And I think
it's short. I mean, it's just a couple minutes, but like you get what it's playing to.
And that is where we do get the more explicit news coverage. We hear voiceover of a reporter who we see at the desk, right, who seems to be calling in a story, that kind of thing. There's also something very interesting there where sometimes I think with social movement history, especially film, by nature of the constraints of the medium, we get very individually focused, right? Like these individuals did this. Really classic example, obviously, is how we think about the Southern Civil Rights Movement bus boycotts with Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks being
Rosa Parks like is the only
did it.
as opposed to like it being a coordinated action that was planned far in advance, was connected to all these different organizations, blah blah blah. I think this movie threads that needle really well by showing us people that we care about and get invested in. We see engaged in tactical choices, but really when the moment of independence happens, it's because of mass mobilizations in the streets, and we really don't have an individual lens into that. It's just like,
and though Ali is the protagonist, you at no sense get the feeling that he is like the sole leader or whatever. In fact, he's like, well, at the beginning when they're like testing him to see if he's trustworthy, like we see that there's kind of nameless faces that are some sort of leadership that send him on this mission. Yeah, it never feels like he is because he's the protagonist. He is the like great man of this historical moment or anything. Right. He's just a cog in the machine or whatever, who we just happen to be focusing on.
Yeah, and part of that balance is that both of those things are necessary. You need the mass to have power, to have leverage.
Right. Yeah.
But you also need the individual motivation and commitment to the cause to light the kindling, right? And I think this movie it navigates both of those things and depicts both of those things simultaneously in a way that I don't really think. Even a movie like Beats Per Minute, BPM, that I love that movie. That movie is so much more focused on like small group, and we don't right. I mean, we see them, there's never really a mass movement that they're part of, right? It's still very much. If you knew
nothing else, you would think the movement was them.
Right. And that they're not connected to the other act-ups.
Whereas in this movie, if you knew nothing else, it still leaves you with the idea that we're watching one small group of a larger movement or whatever.
Right. I just made
listener, I found a new recording posture that I was quite enjoying. And had been sitting one particular way this whole time, and leaning, and had a series of involuntary noises and groans when I adjusted. Sorry about that.
These old bones. Yeah, but it's made clear that this movement, this situation, this cry for liberation and freedom requires that arrangement.
Right.
It's not incidental. It could not be achieved if it weren't for the structure that they've innovated to make that possible.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll move into, I have a little thing here about the parallels of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I think we covered that pretty well, basically everything I wanted to touch on that. So I wanted to, if you don't have anything else on that, to lead into our official Armand White segment.
Let's go. I'm braced.
This one's a weird one. First off, I did forget to mention, but Ennio Morricone's score in this is fucking dope as shit.
Yes. I just, when his name came across the screen, I was like, question mark.
Well, my wife walked by, and my wife's not like, she likes movies, but is not as, I would say, big of a film geek as us. But she walked by and heard the music playing and goes, why do I know this? And I was like, you don't. You just, the style is so singular and like recognizable that when I told her, she was like, oh yeah, obviously it's him. Yeah. But so in our segment, does Armand White like this movie?
Dun, dun, dun.
We try to figure out if Armand White likes these movies or not. And I didn't find a lot on what he had to say about it, but I do have an answer on whether or not he liked it. But I did find one of the weirdest Armand White articles I've found yet. First and foremost, I found a list that we have visited once before, and I just found an interesting parallel. Not really Armand White related. He was one of the pulled critics. Okay. But when we watched One Sings, the Other Doesn't, we looked at the New Republic's list of the 100 most influential political films of all time, and One Sings, the Other Doesn't was exactly number 100. And the Battle of Algiers is exactly number 1 on that list, which I found an interesting parallel. Now, did Armand White like this movie? I'll pose the question. Actually, hold on. Because first, the only thing I could find on Did Armand White Like This was a list that he made himself of a different sort, which is he wrote an article called The Antifa Film Syllabus, wherein he poses that if he was going to do a film class, these are the movies he would show his budding Antifa super soldiers. Here's his intro paragraph.
I agree.
Wait until you get to his examples, because his examples are fucking weird. I don't think he knows what Antifa is, first off, by his examples.
Well, I mean, even if so, I think, like, here's the thing is, like, sometimes, I'm not saying always, but sometimes they're fucking right. It's just their gloss on, like, is that good or not is different. And yes, if I was part of a high-risk social movement organization,
Battle of Algiers being on this list makes sense.
Okay, what are the
Some of the other ones are weird. Okay, so here's how he introduces this list. Lately, many Americans have recognized that the past several generations of students have been indoctrinated into notions on history and behavior taught by Marxism-infatuated educators that encourage a new kind of dissidence, unrecognizable from the anti-war demonstrations of the 60s, blurring loose notions of anti-fascist activity and inverting the meaning of black solidarity have come to define a miseducated demographic that has itself misappropriated racial virtue and become fascist. Love when dummies don't know what the definition of fascism is. So some of the movies on Armin's Antifa film syllabus are predictable. Most predictable being like Parasite, which y'all longtime listeners will remember Armin hates because we talked about that in episode 1. However, a lot of his picks are really weird, so I want to read some of them. 1, all of the Harry Potter movies, because in Armin's words,
army?
It subverts C.S. Lewis and Christian Sunday school parables.
Sure.
No, no clue what that has to do with Antifa, but yeah. Gladiator, because he says
what?
Because it is a comic book movie for those who. Oh, this is Armin White being like, excuse me, I'm a bit of a scholar here. It is a comic book movie for those who never read Gibbon, Virgil, Horace, Socrates, Plato, Ovid, or Steve Reeves.
What the
and
fuck?
He says, frustrated Occupy Wall Street anarchists take inspiration from its rallying cry, "Unleash Hell." First off,
sir, what?
Any dork I've ever heard quote Gladiator in like a non-ironic way are not the Occupy Wall Street types. It's like a fucking dude who put a fucking case of Bud Light on a shooting stand and is like, "Unleash hell on the trans activism," and shot it like.
Okay, Occupy Wall Street activists were way too busy having 3-hour-long meetings that utilize participatory democracy processes, okay?
And dealing with Tim Pool.
What, like, I just...
It's weird.
What? What?
And another conceit of this article, because it's the syllabus, is that on some of his entries, he tells us who would be the guest lecturer for this fictional class of Marxist infatuated educators. And for Gladiator, he said it would be Bernie Sanders, because he represents the classical fantasies of intellectual 90-pound weaklings.
Is he
awesome?
I'm just not understanding.
This list makes no sense.
Who does he think people are cheering for?
Oh,
Commodious?
It's gonna get even weirder on who he thinks people are cheering for in the movies. Okay, the next
Commodious?
one makes no sense.
Name wrong.
Pulp Fiction is on this list because it's a nihilist carnival that turns cinephilia against itself. Honestly, no fucking clue what this one is about at all. Don't know how it fits in. And this is the really weird one. The Social Network, because it's a celebration of tech narcissist Mark Zuckerberg taking revenge on the world. First off, I don't think he saw this movie, because a celebration of Mark Zuckerberg is not what that movie is.
It's also like the conservatives love to do a thing where they're like, anyone that is not us is all in the same group of people. Like
leftists don't like fucking Mark Zuckerberg. What the fuck are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Like, even then, we were like, fuck Mark Zuckerberg. Like there was no, and that movie was not celebrating him at all. And then the last one that just also makes no sense, specifically because like I'm pretty sure this was a movie for your side more than ours, is Joker, because he says it predicted the Black Lives / Antifa mobs and won an Oscar for it. Reminder, Joker came out in 2019. This is after the killings and subsequent uprisings of Freddie Gray, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Gray, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, and countless others. So predicting the Black Lives Matter protests is an interesting phrase there.
I wonder if he likes the King of Comedy.
That is a great question. I'm sure he does. Like, I feel like he has like respect for Scorsese,
because I feel like that's like that would be like the dividing line. Like if he's like, I love the King of Comedy, I'm like, okay, then I'm not really understanding. I'm not saying Joker is good. It's not. But if you watch that movie, you're just like, oh, that's Todd Phillips adding a little bit of therapy language on top of it and trying to make it a comic book movie. It's what are we doing here?
I didn't like it.
Keep Freddie Gray's name out of your mouth. What the fuck are you talking about, sir?
I found Joker a little too twisted for me.
A little too sick.
It's a little too sick.
You know what? I do have to say, I am sorry. I love Lady Gaga.
Oh, I'm definitely
so much.
In
I am
whatever the fuck
absolutely gonna go see that movie the day it opens.
Yeah, I will definitely watch it. I also did not
fucking
like
Todd Phillips got me. He got me.
Yeah,
he's like, you know what would make this better and worse if we put Gaga in it.
All right. So the question: did Armin White like this movie?
I feel it. I'm torn because everything would point towards no, but I feel like he probably does really like Italian neorealist cinema. And so maybe that's like the one thing that he's like, this would have been great if it was only about the French.
Yep. You're
from the French perspective.
You're getting pretty close to the nail on the head here. Me synthesizing a response was, does he like this movie? Yes, except no. And this is where we get a classic Armond White problem. In his capacity as a film critic, he's always in lockstep with the American conservative movement. And we've already talked a lot about how so much of this film and its depiction of French colonization of Algeria looks a lot like America's colonial conquests. And Armond White, and I would imagine conservatives in general, really have to do backflips to justify why this movie is like technically good but actually bad. Here is the totality of Armond White's thoughts on the Battle of Algiers. Is it Gillo?
Yeah, I have no idea.
I'm gonna go Gillo. Gillo Pontecorvo's brilliant neo-realistic style drama was first adopted by 60s militants as wish fulfillment. So right away, any political inspiration drawn from the movie right away is just wish fulfillment, just hipsters trying to recreate a cool movie. And Armond continues. Since then, it's misguided third world sympathy. Goddamn these people that feel bad for third world citizens. These
also,
fuckers.
I will say just the tiniest little affirmation. At least he's using third world correctly here. Yeah. This is something that has increasingly been driving me fucking insane. Is like people in online spaces using first, second, and third world just as if they're like denigrating, as opposed to like it's a description of Cold War political alignment. Yeah. Sorry.
No. I agree. He is using it correctly, but also saying like, why the fuck do we care about them?
Misguided.
Yeah. Misguided sympathy for them. It only confuses anti-colonialism with diaspora retribution.
What does that even mean? Yeah. I don't mean what does it mean. I know what he means, but who is the diaspora here?
Right. You're just...
The retribution is coming from Algerians.
And being currently colonized. Like
that's what I mean. Like the diaspora would be like people that are... Like the only people that could theoretically be conceived of as part of a diaspora here would be some of the French people.
I think he's trying to say like,
what are you talking
he's trying to make that argument that people still make about like like when people say that we shouldn't have oh my fucking god, reparations where like you don't actually want them because it's the right thing to do. You want them to like get justice on this thing that happened 1 million years ago that nobody even cares about, where like no, these are wholly intertwined.
Colonialization was still happening until the Algerian people rose up.
Like the movie is about them being colonized, you dumb fuck. And this is my favorite part. He just wrote the guest lecturers for this one: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, or whoever writes their sound bites. Damn.
You got him, Armond.
But damn, yeah, this was a crazy one. His Antifa film syllabus it mostly was a list of like movies film bros like, and like why he doesn't like them.
I just like Pulp Fiction is deranged.
It's crazy. Like, okay, that's just boomer who doesn't like Quentin's style.
Which like that's fair.
Sure,
but I would say that Quentin Tarantino is one of the most, and I'm not saying that there can't be politics read into or they aren't implicit, but he is, even in his movie that is situated in World War II, with the exception of like even the Jewish fantasy of retribution that's in it is essentially like apolitical.
Right, yeah. It's
revenge movie. It's like exploitation movie fantasy revenge.
Put that one in there instead of Pulp Fiction. Put any of his movies in there instead of Pulp Fiction, honestly, because Pulp Fiction's the weirdest one to... He just didn't like that it was violent. Sorry, buddy. But yeah. This is fun. I really like this movie.
I really enjoyed this movie.
This might be competition because a few episodes ago I said another movie that I had already forgotten what I said was my favorite of what we've done, and now this might be up there. Oh, Candyman was but this might edge it out at some point in my list.
Yeah, it just really made me hunger for someone to like make a movie like this or make more movies like this. It also made me hunger for, by nature of the parallel that I saw, like we talked about with the gangster movies or mob movies, it made me be like, someone make a mob movie. Like, I'm not even saying in the way that this has similarities. I mean, someone straight up make a mob movie about like a social movement organization.
Hell yeah. Well, that would be cool.
It made me want that.
Yeah. Well,
get on it, Scorsese. You
yeah,
got
somebody. You got a couple years.
Don't say that,
man.
He's gonna live forever.
He's old as hell.
He's gonna live forever.
No shade. He's just old.
Have you seen that Guillermo del Toro tweet that it's like, Scorsese is cinema. I would give my life.
Hell yeah.
I made hand painted a sweatshirt with that tweet on it because it's like,
awesome.
if I could give some of my life.
Have you ever seen Guillermo's house?
Yes. Wait, are you talking about his house? Or are you talking about the like cottage that he owns that is his work, essentially a work shed, but it's like bigger than any house that you or I would ever live in?
Whatever I saw, because it was a Conan bit that I saw.
Does it have all the art?
All the horror
stuff?
That's
not his house.
Okay.
Guillermo del Toro owns
cottage.
a like cottage for him to do work in that also includes like, it's like mostly a library functionally and
it's
has
a she shed.
It's a horror shed of a bunch of like life-size recreations of monsters from his movies and of various like horror icons that he loves. And the video that I saw about it says he owns it because his wife was like, none of that shit can be in our house once they had kids. Yeah. So like, because there's like werewolf. I mean, scary. I don't think I would like to be there.
I would. I love that shit.
I don't like life-sized things. This relates to I don't like taxidermy. I don't like large-scale animatronics. Like, it scares me.
I was looking around my room of weird shit
and all
that we
of
record
this
in
is fine.
just to make sure I didn't have any life-size
thing. Even that, which is not Ash is not
I have a
scary.
large Ash from Evil Dead
That's like
doll.
Probably 18 inches, I would say.
It's just bigger than a regular action figure.
If that was life-size, I would not be in this room. I don't like things that are life-size that are fake.
You about one thing in this room that scared the shit out of me and my wife when I got it, which is okay. So I have I collect like a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre stuff, and I have like a 18-inch big ass like Leatherface with the chainsaw figure that I got at a garage sale probably 10 years ago. And what Jess and I did not realize is that it has sounds with that are motion activated. And when we got home from the garage sale, I just throw shit everywhere, and I had put it on like our kitchen table where you would walk by it to
like
go
to
the kitchen. So Jess got up in the middle of the night to go get water, and it just started. It's the part like at the end where Sally's just screaming and the chainsaw is revving, and it just kicked in, and Jess almost fucking died.
Yeah, I was like, I would piss myself, I think, if that happened apropos of nothing. Like if I was not anticipating it.
Oh man, it was scary as hell.
Woo! Well, listeners, I hope that you had a happy Hanukkah. If you celebrate Hanukkah, it's been over for a few days, and that you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa. If you celebrate that, I'm gonna be real, I don't quite know. I know it sometimes overlaps with Christmas.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea? Okay, well, we'll look that up. We're always
learning.
Have
a happy January 6th.
We're always learning. We're always educating ourselves and others, hopefully. And may you not have an unexpected motion activated horror icon on your kitchen table.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.